Well, good afternoon. I do represent thoracic surgery in that in the United States, the four major societies of the AATS, STS, the Foundation for Research, and the boards got together and they appointed sort of an educational czar, which was the surgical director. And so I'm going to represent a little bit of that. And I've had the unique, I'm not sure I can follow with Professor Moat's subtlety in some of his delivery, or the charisma of Chris, but I've had the opportunity to work with Chris for a long time and have learned a huge amount by that association. And education has a number of things on the board because of work hours, because of competency-based education, maintenance of certification, the changing operating room environments, safety, the need for curriculum, the different generational learners. But I'm going to talk today a little bit about, do we have a problem when we finish the training in the transition to practice? Because our goal has to be that the next generation of surgeons is better. I think that's a reasonable assumption. And one of the issues is that we've been stuck in a similar algorithm. Ours in the United States is a little different from yours, and I'll show that. But we can't accept less than a better product. We haven't either grown or we haven't served the population. Well, one thing that happened was that in July of 2012, the American College of Surgeons brought together about 40 of the leading educators in the United States. And they wanted to focus on this transition to practice. And there became a number of issues. For the first time in a long time, the American College of Surgeons was getting all sorts of calls from the surgeons in practice that said, where's this product coming from? And it wasn't just cardiothoracic surgery. It was neurosurgery, it was in a number of general surgery, and they were saying they're not prepared. And the residents, and I'll show you some data, were saying, I just finished 5 years of general surgery, 3 years of cardiothoracic surgery. I don't feel prepared. And the question is, well, they needed to be prepared. And on the continuum of beginner to expert, competencies in the middle, and people were concerned that they were achieving that competency level. It was also becoming increasingly noticeable that the length of training wasn't long enough, and yet the average age of a cardiothoracic surgeon finishing in the United States is 39 years old. The average length of training is 9.4 years. Now that's changed because in cardiothoracic surgery, because there was a time when every single resident who went to training had 2 or 3 years. I did 3 years of research before I finished. And I was about 37 when I finished and started my career. The average problem there, of course, in the United States is that they're $175,000 in debt before they start. They have 2 kids. They have an old car which they need to pay off, and they have a wife at home with 2 kids that says, hey, when's this delayed satisfaction stuff end? So we knew there's a problem. In addition, starting in about 2003, and I'll show you, people were starting to fail their exams for the first time. And the question is what was changing? Was it 80-hour work week? Was it a different generation? Were all of these issues on the table? So clearly with 80 hours in the United States, the time in the hospital went down. Interestingly, of course, from 7 in the morning on Monday until 7 o'clock at night during the week, they were still there. But they weren't necessarily taking care of people at the resident level. They could be in the intensive care unit, or they could be in the operating room. But when they were in the hospital, they were in the hospital almost the same time as the consultant was. So where does decision-making get deferred to? It gets deferred to the expert. So the ability to learn cognitive skills apparently was being lost. Clearly, the operations, the outpatients, a number of these things went down. We knew that there were some things that were happening with it, and that general surgery, which was our foundation, also was changing, and we're having some problems. 86% of all the general surgeons were having to do a specialty. And we in cardiothoracic surgery changed the model a little bit to have what we call integrated residents, but there were clearly some differences. When we looked at some of the obvious ones like vascular surgery, how much of a foundation for us in open cardiac surgery, and yet 90% of that's now done endovascularly. Same thing in general surgery. Lots of other things, which I'll show to, have changed to make that experience different. And when we look even at the experience of open surgicals, it continued to diminish. So here, when we look at trauma, in my era, you were required to do 50 to 60 exploratory laparotomies for trauma, blunt or penetrating. Well, they don't even exist anymore. Biliary tract surgery, common stone exploration. It's not done in general surgery anymore. Gastric surgery, with H2 blockers, it's gone. So the change was really significant. And obviously, it went all over. So the case logs were changing, and the upper echelon of cases was getting changed for a couple of reasons. One of the things that happened was the total cases in the chief residents obviously went down. And when we looked at the attitudes of the programs and the people in the programs, almost all of them showed the modern surgeon has to become specially trained or have additional training, over 2/3 of them, in order to be successful or to be prepared. And that was a huge change in the United States. When we looked at duty hour regulations and looked at what happened, clearly even there, all sorts of things happened. The work schedule changed, and the quality of life for the junior residents changed, and they were really pleased. But the quality of the senior residents was dismal, because all of the responsible aspects and the cognitive aspects, they were losing. And as Chris alluded to, in the digital generation, information is cheap. I can get information on almost anything. But the issue is decision-making, advanced cognitive skills, integration of neural networks, the ability to respond and take information, process it. At 1 o'clock in the morning when the acute dissection comes in and has a malperfusion syndrome, isn't available here. It has to be available here. And until we take on the responsibility to make sure that that cognitive skill comes in, we are going to have a superficial learner, the tip of the iceberg, and yet we have no idea of knowing what's below that. So when we then also looked at it, what happened is that we're changing what we say is important. In general surgery, in order to meet their requirements, they had to say that varicose veins, inguinal hernia, perirectal abscesses were now listed as major cases. And that now compromises 77% of the case list submitted. But we have the same problem when we take component. So right now, we're letting the intern come in and do the open, and the second-year resident comes in and does the cannulation, and the third resident puts them on bypass, and the fourth one does the distal proximals, and the fifth one. So we run the same issue, and it fragments the integration of real true decision making. Now, we then have this issue from that study of what happens. And once again, this is another one that just says, this came out just this year by Frank Lewis, who's the president of the board, saying, we have a problem with this issue. In cardiothoracic surgery, with the loss of our commodity, our cabbage, what we rarely trained people on, which we transferred over to the resident, now with the pressure on faculty for work hours, promotion, we have the risk without that commodity, an increasing complexity, all sorts of new technology, TVAR, TAVI. I heard all of these lectures on minimally invasive. Well, you can't run until you walk. So in the educational arena, we're slow to adopt it because we still have to assure that a resident or a registrar can do the open operation and do it safely and do it successfully. We know now that general surgery is going into a new model called the FIST model, which is focused innovation in surgical training. And they're going to go in an integrated model and now specialize earlier. And they have 11 pilot programs right now. And clearly, they have adopted the fellowship model. Now you have a little bit of difference because you have the registrars and you can spread it out a little bit. But certainly in my world, historically, what this has had is reflected is that right around 2003, when work hours were introduced, all of a sudden we started seeing differences in the exams. This past year, 33% of the people who took the second part of the exam, which is, I have a patient with coronary disease that's 53 years old, they have left main. Can you tell me how you'd approach that? And they can't answer the question in an oral exam. It's almost beyond comprehension. And it's because, partially, multiple values, we're eliminating the opportunity for them to think. We're not creating the environment for them to think. And it's a big, big issue. So this group put together 7 committees. We worked for 3 days. It was fairly intense. We tried to define, how do you restructure this model? What are the issues? What's the innovative opportunities? What's the recommendations for design? Now, you've got to remember that in 1907, Flexner in the United States said, everybody who goes into medical school has to do a certain amount of college, revolutionary. And then, right after that, evolved the residency model. And we in cardiothoracic surgery adopted that. And William Halstead, also from Hopkins, said, okay, it's time-based, it's scientifically founded, it has competent faculty teaching it. In his day, it was pyramidal. It then got changed to more rectangular. It got altered a little bit by Osler around the same time. He was a medical complement to it. But the residency model evolved, and it became standardized. Churchill from the Brigham, very famous thoracic surgeon, said, okay, we need a rectangular system. And that led to the ACGME, this accreditation body. And the issue is that it hasn't changed. And as Chris alluded to, the apprenticeship model which we had, based on time-based, also remember that expertise is not transferable across domains. So all of the deliberate practice and all those books you've recently been in the public, the one thing they say is just because you're a good surgeon has nothing to do with whether or not you're a good educator. Just because you can sit there and operate, it's not a business of watch me, and if you're lucky, you may become another Den Cooley, or even another Tyrone Davis, or whoever your hero is. They, as Tyrone so eloquently talked about today, they put the hours in, they put the time in, and they really had to do it. So clearly, what we've come to recognize is that we have to have better systems, and we can no longer rely simply on non-audited case lists that says this is what I've done. You can't rely on the program director recommendation. They're all prejudiced. How can you say no to a 35-year-old with 2 kids at home who's gone through your residency, you've lived and worked with them, and even though you know they're not up to standard, are you not going to let them make a living? You may push them in some direction, but you can't say no. It doesn't happen. And if we have a problem with the certifying exams and the qualifying exams, we have to look at it differently. And that's where Chris and some of the assessment issues that have been introduced over here are important. So clearly, we have to update the curriculum. And I'm not going to show it today, but Chris knows we have a fancy mind map, new content management system, and we're using Moodle, which is a learning management system, to really integrate the electronic learning, which we think is very exciting. We have to have structured learning. we put in a Moodle course on tracheal surgery, which the residents had to do online in groups because a modern learner likes to learn in groups. We ran it for 5 weeks, and it was all case-based, so that it could be cognitive. And we said to we piloted, we just finished the pilot in January. And I thought this was just a huge step forward because it would really deal with not just information, but knowledge. And the 20 residents, 5 different residencies around the country, and we said, when you go home, you have to work on this. So you can do it in the hospital. You can do it on any device, anytime, your iPad, whatever else. When we finished it, we just finished the assessment, and the residents said, we don't like it. And we said, why? They said, it's too hard. We have to go home, and we have to work at it. I said, well, the information is logarithmically expanding. If you've got 80-hour work weeks, how are we going to do it? And they go, well, I go home, and my wife's been taking care of the baby all week, and I have to go home and take care of the baby. And that's a reality. But we've got to get past that, because if we do not adapt this, if we don't figure out how to structure the teaching and the assessment better, we run a big risk. We run a big risk. So clearly, another solution is earlier specialty training, and whether or not we have to deal with more specialization. We know volume equates into quality, better innovation, better ability to do studies. We have to address that issue head on. It is a real issue if we're going to maintain competency. Just like I'm qualified, and I did lots and lots of babies. I do a lot of adult congenital now, but I haven't done a transposition in 10 years. But if I wanted to, because I'm certified, I could go home and do a transposition in a 3-month-old next week. No, it doesn't work. It can't work. We have got to think through those models in a way to assure the quality and safety. As I said, maybe increasing the length of the residency. Neurosurgery just went from 6 years to 7 years. But we're already 30-something years old. Certainly, we've already passed the creative period. Bill Gates, any of those people, they weren't creative when they were 40. They were creative when they're much younger. So we've got to find out how to integrate that creativity also into this. Competency-based medical education, the simulation, e-learning, all of those things we've got to set standards that are appropriate. So we've got to also look at the chief resident, the transition to practice, independent practice, what are the skills, define them in a way, better assessment. We've got to really work at the competency issue and get past case numbers. They don't work. Observation, it's got to get better than that, and somehow we have to institute better examinations too. Certainly, continuous feedback, criterion-based, emphasis on what they will ultimately do, quality assessment tools, validated methodologies, and emphasize the group wisdom are all critical. And certainly we know the educate-to-educator issue is essential, as Chris alluded to. And it's an alignment of incentives. If we are only valued in our clinical productivity, if we are only worried about doing the things that we think will get us promoted, if we don't create an environment where the responsibility to teach the next generation, they are our children. When you're at home, you say that the only ultimate responsibility you have as a father or a mother is your children. They're responsible for the future. Well, our residents and our registrar aren't. We are a family. And you have to bring in that same passion to education and understand the science of it. Create an environment that people get rewarded in, or it always gets relegated. It gets relegated to the other more obvious reward systems, and we run the risk. We won't have another Tyrone David. We won't have a Carpentier. We won't have a Magda Yakub. We must clearly look at the future and realize our responsibility in this period of transition. We have to, of course, that's my definition of leadership. The leadership with a little L, change the conversation. That's what we have to do. We have to do it in a way that shows that it's responsible and the right thing to do. We also need the mentoring. Just as much as we need to train the educators, clearly we have to change the people in practice to understand that just because you went through a fellowship or just because you went through training doesn't mean that you're competent. We've got to work at the mentorship issue. It is not easy. It's also a science. It's not just being a friend. It's being a constructive criticism. It's being the insightful person. It's having the historical perspective. We as surgeons, when we're hungry and somebody sticks a spoon in our mouth, we stop crying, just like a baby does. When it's bleeding and we put our finger on it, we clap. People clap saying, wow. It's only the historical perspective, like Tyrone brought to that lecture today, that gives us wisdom. And that's the challenge in education right now, is making sure we understand the wisdom and having it passed on through good mentorship models. And certainly, we recognize we need new tools. And ultimately, we have to deal with the regulatory issues. Ultimately, we have to work with the NHS or whatever else is to say, what is acceptable? What can we tolerate? What is the biggest off in that historical perspective of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, and therefore be able to deal with setting new standards. So clearly we believe in the future that expertise rather than experience will be underlying competency-based practice and certification. And this is essentially what we need to do. We need to be able to lead, make it a priority, and make a difference. Thank you.
Ed, can I ask you to stay out for a second? An immensely impressive talk, and obviously passion, and we're very jealous that you can't come over here as well as keep Mr. Munch in control as well. In recognition of your enormous contribution to education and cardiovascular surgery in general, it's a great privilege of mine to offer you honorary membership of the Society.
Well, that's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
I very much would like to thank, when I was a young child, my family, my dad was a mechanical engineer for a textile machinery company. He was offered the opportunity to become a chief engineer in a little town called Verrier, outside of, well, it was Holcombrooke, near Bury, outside of Bolton, and somewhere near Manchester. And I lived there for 3 years, and so the fondness, I remember so distinctly how wonderful the people in that neighborhood took my mother and father, who in that era was the ugly American, and took them in. And when my mom and dad died, when my dad died about 5 years ago, David Clark and his family all came over from that area to say goodbye. And I'm very emotional about England. So the opportunity, or Great Britain, and I was engaged at Skibo Castle in Scotland a number of years ago, and it's probably my favorite spot in the whole world. So the opportunity to come back here and watch the residents, see your science, and hopefully contribute just a little bit has been an enormous honor and pleasure, and I thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.